For centuries, pirates have occupied a unique place in our imagination. We picture them as adventurous rogues sailing beneath the black flag, hunting buried treasure accompanied by parrots and one-legged shipmates. They speak in strange accents, hide gold on remote islands, and live lives of freedom beyond the reach of kings and governments. Yet much of what we think we know about pirates never happened. The reality was far less romantic. Pirates were sailors, criminals, businessmen, and sometimes murderers. Their world was one of disease, violence, fear, and uncertainty. Yet, hidden beneath the legends lies a fascinating truth, one that is often more surprising than the myths themselves. Some of the most enduring pirate myths come from Hollywood, and fictional characters such as Long John Silver and Captain Hook, who have shaped our understanding of piracy just as much as real figures like Blackbeard or Captain Kidd. Because piracy has been a universal phenomenon across all ages, it would be impossible to cover everything. So this video will focus on myths surrounding the pirates of the so-called Golden Age of Piracy.
This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and react channels and YouTube being permissive of AI slop. We don't do drama and we don't do AI, but thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history. Join them by scanning the QR code on your screen, via the links in the description or pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video.
By far the most popular myth surrounding pirates is the one about buried treasure. It's featured in countless movies, games, and novels about pirates. The trope is well known. The captain of the ship buries his treasure, usually on a small tropical island, so that no one else can find it. In some cases, there's even a map with a dotted line and a giant red X that marks the spot. While the buried treasure and the whole treasure hunt trope set up an exciting adventure, pirates were more concerned with enjoying their wealth than with making fascinating tales. In reality, they tended to spend their wealth quickly, usually on women and booze, or on materials they would need for the ship or for personal use. This behavior makes sense, since they did not expect to live long lives. They tried to get the most out of it while they still could. If they did make a fortune, like Henry Every, they would try to vanish and live out their days on that wealth, not use tropical beaches as some kind of vault. It would simply make no sense to keep risking their lives. The myth was popularized by 19th and 20th century novels, such as Poe's The Gold Bug, which was inspired by real rumors about Captain William Kidd's treasure. But by far the most influential work of literature regarding the buried treasure myth was Stevenson's Treasure Island. In fact, such was its popularity that it would not be entirely false to say it is solely responsible, not only for creating and spreading this myth, among others, but also for shaping how we imagine pirates. Another myth, somewhat connected to buried treasure, is the belief that pirates hunted for chests filled with gems and gold coins. This is not an outright invention, as we know that both pirates and especially privateers would target treasure fleets if their strength permitted. Some prime examples include Henry Every, who in 1695 captured the Grand Mughal fleet, and Sir Francis Drake, who is famous for attacking the Spanish treasure fleets that transported gold and silver from South America to Iberia. However, the regular loot for pirates was not chests filled with doubloons, diamonds, or rubies. It was, in fact, much more mundane cargo, like tobacco, sugar, rum, silk, cotton, tools, and, in some cases, yes, even slaves. Essentially, the pirate ship was more like a floating warehouse than a vault, as pirates would seize the cargo of merchant vessels and then sail to friendlier harbors to sell those goods. Another extremely popular myth is that pirates executed their victims by making them walk the plank. Popularized by Treasure Island and especially by Barrie's Peter Pan, the rather theatrical method of execution was actually exceptionally rare. The slow, cruel, and ritualized punishment may have worked cinematically, But reality was far uglier and faster, as pirates would simply hang, hack down, or throw overboard their victims. The same goes for keel hauling, a practice in which the unlucky sailor would be bound by ropes, cast overboard, and then dragged under the ship's keel. Sharp barnacles growing on the keel could inflict serious, often fatal, wounds. Despite its prevalence in popular pirate imagery, keel hauling was rarely used by pirates. It was primarily a punishment used by the Dutch Navy, and even there it was still a rare occurrence. A far more popular, but still cruel, punishment among the pirates of the golden age of piracy was marooning, the act of abandoning the sentenced sailor to an uninhabited island, often not much bigger than a sandbar, contrary to the romanticized, adventurous image that was cultivated later by novels and especially Robinson Crusoe. Marooning was a particularly slow and agonizing form of death sentence through thirst and hunger, and it was very unlikely the marooned sailor would find a means to escape. Marooning was most often used as a punishment for those who had deserted the ship or stolen from other pirates. On one occasion, however, Blackbeard used it rather inventively. Following a successful raid on Charleston, he marooned 17 of his crewmen simply so that he could keep the loot for himself. Torture and death were one part of a pirate's grim life on the high seas, but another part was injuries that he could sustain in battle. Those came along with the risks of the profession. If we tell you to close your eyes and picture a pirate, you'd probably imagine him with an eye patch, maybe with a peg leg or a hook. To complete the image, let us add a talking parrot perched on his shoulder. This image combines the two archetypes of pirates in popular culture: Long John Silver from Treasure Island and Captain Hook from Peter Pan. But it is by no means what your average pirate of the early 18th century would look like. Let us start with the prosthetics. Pirates, and sailors in general, were exposed to dangers like cannon and musket fire, splinter wounds, storms, falls, and other accidents while working, so the danger of losing a limb was ever present. We have examples of people who used peg legs, though the ship's slippery deck was certainly not the best place for them. They would, therefore, most likely have been employed in the kitchen. But even that was a stretch. The far more common fate for those who did lose a limb and survived the amputation was an early retirement. Pirate articles often included compensation for permanent injuries. For example, those who sailed under Bartholomew Roberts and lost a limb were entitled to 800 pieces of 8 from the common fund. The eye patch is a bit of a different story. Among the injuries one could sustain was the loss of an eye, which would be covered with a piece of cloth. It was, in fact, not an uncommon sight among sailors and soldiers. However, while pirates certainly suffered eye injuries, we have little evidence that eye patches were any more common among pirates than among other sailors. It has been suggested that pirates wore patches over one eye to keep the other eye adjusted to darkness, so they would not have to wait for their vision to adjust when going below deck. While it makes sense from a physiological point, once again, we do not have solid evidence to support the claim. Of course, as we've already said, our imaginary pirate is not complete without his trusted pet, the parrot. Now, pirates are associated with exotic birds, but not in that way. The image of the green-feathered parrot, perched permanently on the captain's shoulder squawking "pieces of 8," is entirely fictional. Its origins, once again, trace back to Stevenson's Treasure Island. However, pirates were known to capture exotic birds like parrots and other animals like monkeys, which could fetch quite a sum in European markets. It's also not impossible for an eccentric captain to have kept a parrot in a cage, but as a general rule, pirates did not have feathered sidekicks. Another stereotypical characteristic most people imagine about pirates is their speech. "Cannons be ready, Captain," or "Yarr, me mateys," phrases more or less woven into pirate pop culture. But are they real? The short answer is no. Historical pirates spoke like every person of their time. Phrases like "shiver me timbers" are literary inventions. The world-famous "yo-ho-ho" comes once again straight from Stevenson's Treasure Island. As for the "Arrr," which has become synonymous with pirates, all the evidence we have points to actor Robert Newton, who played Long John Silver in Disney's 1950 adaptation of Stevenson's novel. His Arrr, spoken with his heavy southwestern English accent, became very popular and was mimicked on both the silver screen and television, eventually becoming part of pirate pop culture. But while pirates did not use theatrical phrases, they did have their own jargon, which was mostly the nautical jargon of the age, since most pirates did have a professional sailor background. As such, their language was filled with maritime terminology that would have been difficult to understand from the viewpoint of someone who had spent his entire life on land. Furthermore, the crews were not necessarily ethnically homogeneous, and while they operated in an English-dominated environment, Dutch or French nautical terms, as well as African loanwords, could slip their way into the vocabulary. In pop culture, it's not uncommon to find portrayals of pirates as noble rebels or adventurers who fight against the oppression of empires. Perhaps no better example of this exists than Luffy, though since One Piece does not take place in our world, maybe he gets a free pass. This depiction of pirates is mostly wrong, but there are some nuggets of truth. Pirates did rebel against brutal captains, merchant exploitation, and naval discipline, but that was to improve their living conditions and earn more money. The golden age of piracy, in particular, was fueled by thousands of sailors and privateers who found themselves unemployed after the end of great wars, such as the War of the Spanish Succession. It is true that some ships had elected officers and shared the loot rather equally, or at least at a fairer rate than the wages of naval or merchant ships. However, that did not make them some sort of maritime Robin Hoods. Their attacks were highly opportunistic, often targeting weakly armed small ships, and were based on threat of force and terror. Generally speaking, a pirate attack, more often than not, ended with the other ships surrendering without a fight. The captain of the merchant ship had little incentive to resist. The cargo was covered by insurance. The pirates were better armed and more numerous, and his crew were not paid enough to die heroically. This was also convenient for the pirates, who did not want to risk their lives or the integrity of the cargo that they wanted to steal. So most pirates aimed to acquire a reputation for ruthlessness and used that infamy to subdue their targets without a fight. And that infamy came, of course, not by empty threats, but by killing and torturing their victims. An interesting case is that of Edward Thatch, the notorious Blackbeard, who wove slow-burning fuses into his hair, which emitted thick black smoke, giving him an almost demonic appearance and terrifying his enemies. And what better way to convey their infamy than the skull and crossbones flag, the Jolly Roger? Or maybe not. While the Jolly Roger was very much real, and the skull and bones motif was featured on many pirate flags, it was not a universal requirement. Cutlasses, hourglasses, skeletons, and hearts, as well as the devil, often appeared on pirate flags. In fact, not even the black flag itself was standard among them. Earlier, buccaneers used national flags, or red flags, but during the golden age of piracy, there was a greater need for pirate ships to distinguish themselves from navy vessels, since merchant ships tended to offer more resistance to pursuers who were not pirates. Besides, the great variety that existed among the flags of the various pirate fleets, a pirate ship flew different flags by necessity. In order to approach its target, it needed to fly colors that would not spook it. So pirates would only raise their colors once in range of their prey, usually accompanied by a warning shot demanding surrender. In essence, the black flag was a form of psychological warfare, used to intimidate merchant fleets. And perhaps that is the perfect note to end on. Even the Jolly Roger, the most recognizable symbol of piracy, turns out to be more complicated than the legend suggests. The same can be said for buried treasure, peg legs, parrots, pirate speech, and all the other images we associate with life under the black flag. The pirates of history were neither the swashbuckling heroes of fiction nor the caricatures of popular culture. They were real people living in a brutal world, and the truth of their lives is often far more complex than the legends that replace them. Yet, perhaps that is why pirate stories endure. We'll talk about the pirates and early modern history more in the near future, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 300 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description, or by pressing the join button under the video. To watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.